If you enjoyed Bakemonogatari as much as I did, then you might have had a few questions lingering by the end. I know I did. I wanted to know how Araragi met Hanakawa and Oshino, how he became a half-vampire, and what he did to Shinobu to leave her in such a mute state. What happened during that spring break that was so miserable that Araragi vows never to tell his story to anyone. This is where Kizumonogatari comes in, a light novel written as a prequel to Bakemonogatari to answer all of these questions. I will be spoiling Bakemonogatari, so for those who haven't seen it, you might want to stop watching now. Is Araragi's shameful secret juicy enough to read about, or was this a story best left untold? It's the first day of spring break for Koyomi Araragi, and on this day, 2 consecutive chance encounters will set a particularly unfortunate chain of events in motion. After meeting the model student Hanakawa, who describes the rumour of a beautiful blonde vampire, Araragi comes face to face with the legend herself, limbless under a lone streetlight. Compelled to save her, he finds himself tasked with retrieving Kissho Asarolo Reinhardt Underblade, the cold-blooded, iron-blooded, yet hot-blooded, apparition-slaying vampire's arms and legs from a trio of ruthless vampire hunters. Kizumonogatari's story might be a prequel, but the beats it follows are very different from Bakemonogatari. It's much more of a shonen affair, the plot driven by the battles that Araragi has to participate in. Bake was more of a slice of life story where physical conflicts were very few and far between. This is a good thing if you're a fan of moments like Araragi's fight with the Rainy Devil, and Kizu doesn't lose the inherently charming character interactions of the Monogatari series either. The plot is driven by what characters do and what characters say at a good 50-50 split. The thing about the action sequences though is that they are over and done with way too quickly for the build up that they're given. What Araragi can or cannot do is never actually defined, so within the context of the story he can do anything as long as he gets the idea to do it. His excuse for becoming able to fight is so downright baffling that half the time I felt like the book was kidding me. He buys a bunch of martial arts manuals and superpower manga and reads them, and after doing that he can fight now. It's so ridiculous that it is beyond belief. I think that this makes it clear that Nishiosen is both very inexperienced and lacks a particular talent to write an action-oriented story. It would have been okay if the story didn't revolve around the fights, and if Araragi's learning methods were just another in a long line of quirky jokes, but the whole action-oriented aspect of the story is taken completely seriously. Although there is still plenty of what Nishiosen does best, depth. This story is packed with the same kind of unforeseeable twists that made Bakemonogatari so compelling. Offhand comments made by the characters can become key to the plot much later on, taking on a greater significance. These twists make Araragi's situation increasingly despairing as he progresses towards his goal of becoming human once more. This culminates in an ending that thankfully does not understate the misery the characters have found themselves in. Any thematic catharsis or semblance of a good ending is not forced out of an intentionally bleak outcome, the nature of which makes it very believable that Araragi would want to leave these events very much behind him. Araragi is a typical loner high school kid who would like nothing more than to remain detached from others for the rest of his life, at first. Over the course of this novel and his interactions with the other characters, he begins to confront his own human need for companionship and the compassion that gets in the way of his own childish wishes. His characterization is extremely strong in this regard. His base personality isn't particularly generic either, playing a melodramatic straight man in the comedy of his own peculiar circumstance. The one weakness to his character is the lack of strong definition as to what he can or can't do, though this doesn't harm his characterization much at all. Araragi is a character whose development is marked by his initial desire to reject his own humanity, followed by a desperation to recover the very same humanity which he has lost. Hanakawa is among the novel's biggest problems. Bakemonogatari's best character becomes the prequel's worst, and here's why. At the end of Bakemonogatari, we come to understand that Hanakawa is head over heels in love with Araragi, though we aren't led to believe quite when this happened. Kizumonogatari's story assumes that you've already read or seen Bake, and only in terms of Hanakawa's behaviour. She behaves as if she's already in love with him from the moment they meet, which is a ridiculous notion in a series as driven by character development as Monogatari. This on top of Hanakawa's designated fanservice girl role means that she comes off as slutty, for want of a better word. She keeps coming back to support Araragi, despite the death of her own modesty and the physical danger she's putting herself in. Hanakawa's character in this novel is baffling, unrealistic, and terribly contrived. She does provide a reason for her constant interference in Araragi's business, but it is incredibly vague, meaningless, and thematically tone deaf. Kissshot Acerola Orion Heart Underblade, on the other hand, is one of the novel's most solid characters. She is initially depicted as a very typical old-world Dracula-esque vampire, but quickly becomes much more three-dimensional. Kissshot displays very sympathetic human emotions like fear and compassion. This is crucial in creating in her a character who we want to see recover to her full power, subverting the antagonistic connotations of a vampire. Her body also undergoes drastic changes throughout the course of the story, which keeps her interesting enough to maintain her bold presence in the narrative. Kissshot is an amazing character, and in stark contrast, the three vampire hunters are barely remarkable. Although they initially come off as threatening with a decently strong screen presence, the fast-paced and one-sided nature of the fights means that this impression doesn't last long. Dramaturgy, episode, and guillotine cutter are all well distinguished from each other in both appearance and personality, which is such a shame when they are introduced and swept aside in the space of a single chapter. The eccentric writing style Nishiosen employs here is very enjoyable. The stories he writes establish a strong personal connection between the audience and the narrator through its conversational style. The words flow out of the page, making the book hard to put down without finishing a chapter. He is also able to shift the tone fluidly between serious and comedic. The conversational humour Nishiosen writes is reliant on the reader's ability to imagine the conversation, and the writing perfectly emulates comedic timing. The flow of the narrative also behaves like a stream of consciousness at times, which allows the reader to get into the narrator, Araragi's head. Nishiosen's trademark style is absolutely perfect for establishing the strong yet flawed characters that have made the Monogatari series such a staple of the light novel scene. In a way, Kizumonogatari reads like a traditional novel because of the lack of actual illustrations in the book. Apart from the front cover of the book, there are a total of 2 illustrations by Vofan. You might assume that this is a case of quality over quantity, but I'm afraid that what we do get looks jagged, ugly, and mismatched with the miserable, despairing tone of the material it's supposed to be depicting. Although the front cover is a very appealing illustration, if a little jagged like the rest. A novel doesn't need illustrations at all to be enjoyable, but it's what sets the Japanese light novel apart from the common novel. Illustrations in the right places can lend context to a situation and describe what words may not have been able to fully convey. The lack of them here isn't distracting or even damaging, but it is certainly disappointing. And that's all I've got to say about Kizumonogatari. As a prequel to Bakemonogatari, it answers all the questions and exercises some of the strong characterization that defines the series. Although Hanakawa's characterization is butchered and any semblance of action is poorly written, Nishiosen still does what he's good at, creating a truly compelling narrative with amazing twists and an iconic writing style full of character. This makes for a lacking, but ultimately rewarding prequel. Should you pick it up? Honestly, I can't recommend it as your first experience with Monogatari because it's a bit of a departure from the other works in the series, but if you already know and enjoy Monogatari, then absolutely pick this one up. When Scotland Loves Anime came around last October, I went to see the first 2 film adaptations, and due to their faithful nature, I've decided to briefly review them here instead of giving them their own video. I may give them their own video, but only after the 3rd film is released. Let's start off with the first movie, Nekketsu. The most glaring difference in terms of the story here is the snail's pace that the plot moves at. There are some extremely long drawn out scenes and shots that add nothing but extra screen time. They very easily could have compressed the entire story of the original light novel into 2 films at most, because the first film suffers terribly from the trilogy approach. There are also changes here or there, like Araragi meeting Kissshot on a subway platform rather than under a streetlight. Although I can forgive the film for this easily thanks to the sheer visual spectacle that it achieves. 4 animation studios pitched into this project, including Shaft, Gainax, and PA Works, and it really shows. 3D CGI backgrounds are blended seamlessly with 2D character models, with some ambitious type of shots which revolve around the characters, and the level of detail on display makes for a truly gorgeous motion picture. Key moments from the novel are given greater emphasis through the incredible visuals, and offhand jokes are elevated to laugh out loud moments by the impeccable comedic timing and intentional melodrama that Akiyuki Shimbo has graced the adaptation with. The entire audience roared with laughter every time, certainly making it the most fun I've had at a cinema. Sharp-eared listeners might hear some familiar notes in the soundtrack, and that's because some of Bakemonogatari's most prevalent tracks have been given a more tonally fitting overhaul and used in the film. The bad pacing gave me some time to just close my eyes and enjoy the lovingly remixed tracks. Not that it forgives the pacing, but it made the film and Bakemonogatari feel connected in some way, which I can appreciate. The second movie is a major improvement over the first, with a pacing that actually doesn't put you to sleep. Because it covers what could be considered the bulk of the novel, there's a lot more going on in the film. Although the plot still suffers from many of the same problems as the novel, thankfully Araragi's learning how to fight arc is cut down to nothing more than an offhand joke. In the novel, Hanakawa buys Araragi absurd amounts of superpower action manga. Thanks to the removal of this plot point and the visualization of the novel's material, she becomes a much more believable character. The quality of the animation continues into this film, and I can't say much about the soundtrack here. None of the tracks were as noteworthy to me as the ones from the first film were. Overall, I can't recommend going out of your way to see 1 out of 3 of these movies at a time because they are way too short and slow paced, nor would I recommend going to see them as a substitute for the novel just yet. However, when the third film comes out, and in the event that you can see all of them, then I would absolutely recommend you see them. The switch to a present tense third person perspective makes them more than worthy of your first experience with Monogatari. Series veterans will also be more than willing to look past the flaws to enjoy what is a very fun adaptation, and I'm confident the third movie will occupy a space in between the first two in terms of quality. Kizumonogatari is available in paperback from Vertical Comics, who have licensed the rest of the Monogatari series for English release. An audiobook version is available on all good platforms, but I've listened to a sample of it and the acting in it is cringeworthy at best. Out of sheer honesty, I can't recommend the audiobook version to anyone. As of right now, the films have not been licensed for release in the UK, but we can expect a release perhaps after the third film in a box set as a trilogy. For alternate recommendations, I'm not extremely familiar with the light novel scene quite yet, although I am working on it, so for now I'll have to branch out a bit into other platforms. If you liked the humour and characterisation, and even if you weren't a fan of the plot itself, then I'd still recommend you check out Kizumonogatari's mother series, Bakemonogatari. It is much less action oriented than Kizu, with a wealth of interesting new characters and a more slice of life approach. Or if you want another vampire series, then I'd recommend the manga Rosario Vampire. It is much more light-hearted than Kizumonogatari, but if a typical shonen vampire outing is what you're after, then Rosario Vampire shouldn't disappoint. Hopefully one of these will be to your liking. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, cheerio.